Okay, our next question comes from Clara in Shellsburg, Iowa, and this looks at the other side of the football. The Browns will be in the chase for the division/playoffs if the defense can blank. Mary Kay, what do you think?
I think more so than anything, they need to get takeaways. They need those takeaways. That makes the difference between winning and losing. Get that ball back for your quarterback. Let those guys up front be disruptive, wreak that havoc, and those guys back in the back end get their hands on some of those footballs, force some of those fumbles. I think that will make the difference. That's what a dominant defense does, and most of the teams that make the playoffs are way high up there in the turnover differential. So that's where I'm going with that.
I had a suspicion that would be your answer, but I also think it's the right answer because
Yeah.
I mean, anymore, like it's such a cliche, right? Like the team that wins the turnover battle wins the game, but there's a reason people say that, and it's because it's true. Like there's nothing more devastating to an offense than turning the football over and the other team scoring points off of that. That's how you change a game, and it's just something that this defense has been lacking, Ashley. So I was going to take that one if Mary Kay didn't. I just think that's the really I just think that's the answer. You've got to force turnovers in today's NFL against these high-powered offenses.
Yeah, to quote Mean Girls, and I know Mary Kay loves this quote, it's like we have ESPN or something, because that was also my first thought. I had a feeling it was where Mary Kay was going to go. I did think of a backup answer that we can talk about after this, but I think it also just kind of shows the way this team has struggled the last 2 years with its defense. Those struggles have really been, I think, exacerbated by the fact that they weren't forcing a ton of takeaways. It's like, again, I bring this up a lot. Like Greg Newsome doesn't have a takeaway yet. That's crazy to me. Like that he does not have an interception, given some of all the action that he's seen over his first 2 years in the NFL. It's just something they've really struggled with. And, it's not like, I think the frustrating thing for them, especially last year, there was such an emphasis on creating those takeaways. They had that alpha dog competition in training camp where takeaways were a big part of it. They had the bone collector thing during the season. They were giving out dog bones on the sideline. Like there were incentives and focus on it, and it still just wasn't happening. So now with Jim Schwartz and them focusing on putting so much pressure on quarterbacks and everything starting up front, I think, there's a good chance that we'll see that ramped up because takeaways could kind of come with that then.
Yeah, and Mary Kay, it's the complementary football thing, right? It's if this offense can be what we think it can be, if you force takeaways, that's when a 21-17 game suddenly becomes a 33-13 game, right? Like a game that maybe should have been closer turns into a blowout because you're making things easier for your offense, and that's just something the Browns haven't been able to do defensively the last few years.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look statistically at wins and losses, when you win the turnover battle, it's usually something like 80% of the time you win the game if you win the turnover battle. So you can do everything else right. And if you are turning the ball over and not taking it away, and you're down in the negatives of the turnover differential, you're just not going to be winning football games. Now, the good thing about Deshaun Watson is that he does not throw a lot of interceptions. As I mentioned, in that 2020 season, when he finished with that 112.4 rating, he had 33 touchdowns against only 7 interceptions. He threw a lot of passes, he threw for a lot of yards, and he did not throw it to the other team very often. I do think that he's going to throw a whole lot of touchdown passes, not many interceptions, and I think you'll see guys like, Juan Thornhill. He comes in being able to get his hands on some footballs. I think that some other guys will. Grant Delpit too. I think that he's got that in him. And again, some of the defensive backs should be able to do that a little bit. Denzel Ward has been able to come up with 3 and 4 at times. So maybe he'll get some more with all that pressure going on up front. Forced fumbles, they've got to get them. They've got to get those. They can come as, sack fumbles, or they can come, with your, running backs or your pass catchers or whatever the case may be, but they definitely need to get more of those as well. And I think they will.
So Ashley, what was your other answer?
My other answer I was just thinking of was like the defense, and it's so cliche, I guess, as I'm going to try to word it, but I think there's some truth to it. This defense staying together as they install a new defense, and again, Paulinka the puppy agrees with me as he tried to get in the room. Because last year, and I mean, even to some extent the year before that, there was just so much disgruntledness, like individuals being disgruntled. Of course, last year it was Jadeveon Clowney for most of the season. We can all remember back to that first Ravens game in October when there was screaming among the defensive players in the locker room. Greg Newsome was publicly unhappy with his role. I think JJ3 at times last year, who's no longer with the Browns, obviously, he was unhappy at times. Like, you just felt that unhappiness. And it just felt to me, especially last year, that things were really coming apart at the seams. I think the year before that, it was more like, hey, we finally got in a rhythm and this offense isn't doing anything. And that was creating some of the angst. But I just think the unit as a whole needs to be as angst free as possible.
And Mary Kay, that kind of